Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us. I'm Abu Sabzwari, and now to the headlines. Syrian government forces seize control of Quasyr. U.S. renews Iran sanctions waivers for China, India, and others. Mosque burns down in London in suspicious circumstances. Obama picks loyalist Susan Rice as National Security Advisor. Australian forces holding several Afghan nationals illegally. Nawaz Sharif, sworn in as Pakistan's 18th Prime Minister, urges end to U.S. drone strikes. Tehran hosts the biggest Quranic event in the Islamic world. And now the news in detail. The Syrian government forces and their Lebanese Hezbollah allies seized control of the border town of Quasyr on Wednesday, a severe setback to rebel fighters battling to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. After 2 continuous weeks of intense fighting, the town has been reduced to piles of concrete, whole blocks flattened by shelling, with glass and rubble littering the roads. Street after deserted street lay in ruins, windows blown out, and trees blackened and burnt. The dome of the local mosque damaged by rocket fire, and the walls of a church smashed open. The fall of Quasyr, which lies on a cross-border supply route with Lebanon, might make it harder to convince both sides to attend a proposed peace conference in the coming weeks. Signaling the diplomatic difficulties, International Representative for Syria Lakhdar Brahimi said in Geneva that the date for the conference had slipped back from June to July. Brahimi stated that the only sticking point is the Syrian component of the conference after meeting U.S. and Russian officials. In a frank assessment of their defeat, an opposition group from Quasyr said more than 500 rebels had died in 2 weeks of combat, with a further 1,000 wounded, leaving just 400 outgunned men struggling to hold on to the town. The capture of Quasyr secures an important corridor through the central province of Homs, which links the Syrian capital Damascus to the coastal heartland of Assad's minority Alawi sect, an offshoot of Shia Islam. More than 80,000 people have been killed since the Syrian revolt erupted in March 2011. 1.6 million refugees have fled a conflict that has fueled sectarian tensions across the Middle East, spilling over into Lebanon and divided world powers. The U.S. State Department renewed 6-month waivers on Iran sanctions for China, India, and 7 other economies in exchange for their agreeing to reduce purchases of oil from Iran. Secretary of State John Kerry, in a statement, said the United States and the international community stand shoulder to shoulder in maintaining pressure on the Iranian regime until it fully addresses concerns about its nuclear program. The waivers, which the State Department calls exceptions, mean that financial institutions in the consumer countries do not risk being cut off from the U.S. financial system for the next 6 months. Sanctions are one of Washington's main strategies to choke funding to Iran's nuclear program, which different countries suspect seeks to develop the ability to make weapons. Iran, however, insists the program is for peaceful purposes only. State Department and Treasury officials have pushed consumer countries to significantly reduce their purchases of Iranian oil without defining the volumes that have to be cut. U.S. and EU sanctions more than halved Iran's oil shipments last year, helping to devalue the country's currency and pushing up inflation. This May, the sanctions drove the Islamic Republic's crude exports to the lowest level in decades. Despite the damage the sanctions have done to its economy, Iran's government has foreign currency reserves worth tens of billions of dollars with which it can fund the nuclear program. There is little evidence the sanctions have slowed the program ahead of a presidential election in Iran next week. A mosque burned down in Britain in a suspected arson attack on Wednesday intensifies fears of a backlash against Muslims after a British soldier was killed on a London street last month. Police said they were treating the mosque fire as suspicious and that the letters EDL had been found scrawled on the side of the building. EDL is the acronym of the English Defence League, a far-right group that has held several protests in London and elsewhere since the murder. However, the EDL has denied any involvement. The Islamic Centre in the Muswell Hill neighbourhood of North London was mainly used by the local Somali community. Fire brigades were called to the scene overnight after reports of an explosion. There have been no reported injuries. Last week, a mosque in the northeastern city of Grimsby was pelted by patrol bombs, and similar attacks were reported in the south of England after the May 22nd murder of Lee Rigby. Police, politicians, and religious leaders have called for calm and unity. Rigby's family has appealed against any reprisals. Farouk Murad, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, in a statement said, "This is the latest in a series of attacks on Muslim institutions since the horrific murder of drummer Lee Rigby." He also added that British Muslim community came out in droves to condemn this murder, and it is despicable that Muslims should be held to account and suffer in this way. President Barack Obama chose close confidant Susan Rice as his new national security advisor on Wednesday, increasing White House control over foreign policy and defying Republican critics of her handling of last year's deadly attack on a U.S. diplomatic compound in Libya. According to officials, Susan Rice, the U.S. permanent representative to the UN, is to become President Barack Obama's national security advisor. She will replace Tom Donilon, who is set to announce shortly he is resigning after almost 3 years in the post. Ms. Rice was once seen as a contender for the job of Secretary of State, but was forced to withdraw after opposition from Republicans in Congress. She was criticized for her remarks after an attack on diplomats in Libya. On Wednesday, the White House said Mr. Obama would nominate Samantha Power, a human rights researcher and former White House advisor, to replace Ms. Rice as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. The Australian Armed Forces are illegally holding several Afghan nationals at a secret prison in the troubled southern Uruzgan province. Afghan officials say the prison is located at the Australian-controlled Trincote military base in the country's volatile south. Sources say the exact number of inmates is not known, and prisoners have been detained without trial. The detainees' lawyers said they have been held in custody without charge for several months, which amounts to unlawful detention and internment. Australia forces are also refusing to hand over the prisoners to Afghan authorities. This is while the regulations require Australia to hand over detainees to Afghan authorities within 4 days. The Kabul government has already condemned the detention of its nationals by British troops in the UK-run Camp Bastion in the troubled Helmand province. The British troops are holding up to 90 Afghan detainees suspected of killing British soldiers at the military prison. Australia has about 1,500 troops in Afghanistan. A total of 38 Australian troops have been killed since the U.S.-led invasion of the country in 2001. Newly elected Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was administered the oath of office by President Asif Zardari on Wednesday, hours after the PMLN chief was voted to lead the National Assembly and form the government at the center. Pakistan's new Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has called for an end to U.S. drone strikes in his first address since being re-elected. In a statement, Sharif said, "We respect the sovereignty of others, and they should respect our sovereignty and independence." This campaign must come to an end, he added. Nawaz Sharif faces numerous challenges, including Taliban attacks and a crippled economy. Mr. Sharif also pledged to tackle corruption, reduce unemployment, and power cuts. He told MPs that it was necessary to work out a joint strategy to stop drone strikes. The BBC's M. Ilyas Khan, who was in Parliament to hear Mr. Sharif speak, says that the underlying message was that U.S. concerns about militancy need to be addressed. But the Prime Minister gave few details on how he might bring about an end to drone strikes, which many in Pakistan see as an affront to Pakistani sovereignty. Washington regards the drone attacks as a vital weapon against militants fighting U.S.-led forces in Afghanistan. Mr. Sharif also appealed for unity while stressing that improving the economy will be his top priority. The Prime Minister, moreover, said his government's priority would be to give the country a solid infrastructure, bring in economic reforms, and tackle corruption. And now to Iran, where the biggest Quranic event is taking place in Tehran. Tehran is hosting the 30th International Quran Competition in recitation and memorization categories. The event has brought together over 110 reciters and memorizers from 75 countries across the world. At the contest, the competitors will demonstrate their talents in reciting and memorizing the Holy Book. Since its first inauguration in 1983, the competition gradually opened its place among Muslim scholars, serving as a platform for introducing new faces to the Muslim world in the field of recitation and memorization of the Holy Quran. A number of Iranian and international reciters have been selected to serve at the jury panel of the 2013 competition. On the sidelines of the international contest, a seminar on Quranic research is also scheduled to be held. The 30th International Quran competitions will continue until June 7, 2013. Last year's winners were Egypt, Bahrain, and Iran for recitation, and the prize for best memorizers went to competitors from Iran, Bangladesh, and Libya. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Today, the 27th of Rajab, is a blessed day, also known as Laylat al-Mab'ath or Shab-e-Mi'raj, when our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went on his divine journey, traveling through the heavenly worlds. On this holy occasion, we would like to pray for the prosperity of our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters all across the world who continue to suffer today. We thank you for joining us and hope you stay tuned to the Salam Ya Hussein program, a 5-day special transmission live from the holy shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. If you have any community news you would like to share, you can email us at news@velayattv.org. You can also catch up on the latest headlines and more by logging on to our website, velayattv.org, or follow our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages at Velayat TV USA. See you next time. I'm Avi Satwari.